The Egyptian government has said it for decades. The Giza Plateau has been fully mapped, fully studied, fully understood. That is the official position. It has not changed. In March of 2025, a team of Italian researchers pointed a ground-penetrating radar at the limestone beneath the pyramid of Kaffa and pressed a button. What came back was not sand, not bedrock, not the natural voids formed by geological pressure over millennia. What came back was a geometry that does not occur in nature, at a depth that no known civilization in the accepted timeline of ancient Egypt could have reached. The scans are real. The data is public, and the official response has been near complete silence. That silence is what this video is about. Subscribe now. What comes next will rewrite what you thought you knew. Don't let the algorithm bury it. You probably learned the same version of ancient Egypt that most Americans did, somewhere between a textbook and a documentary, across 5 or 6 decades of reading and watching. Pharaoh's monuments, the Old Kingdom, beginning around 2600 BCE, the pyramids as the supreme achievement of Bronze Age engineering. That version is not entirely wrong, but it is, at minimum, incomplete. What the 2025 GPR surveys beneath the Giza Plateau revealed, and what a Japanese archaeological team confirmed using entirely separate methodology, suggests that beneath the most studied site in human history, something far older may be waiting. We are going to follow this story in sequence, from the Italian scans of March 2025, through the explosive June revelation of what lies beneath the Pyramid of Kafir, to the geological evidence that places everything in a timeline most Egyptologists refuse to accept. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the data emerging from under Giza is not a curiosity. It is a direct challenge to the official chronology of human civilization. The story begins with a piece of technology that, on the surface, seems almost mundane. Ground-penetrating radar (GPR) works exactly the way it sounds. You send electromagnetic pulses into the Earth. They bounce back at different speeds depending on what they hit: rock, water, air, or an empty chamber. Geologists use it to find buried pipes. Archaeologists use it to find sealed tombs. And in March of 2025, Professor Corrado Malanga of the University of Pisa, working alongside researcher Filippo Biondi, used it to look beneath the Pyramid of Kafir. What they expected to find was more or less what every prior survey had returned: natural rock formations, minor geological voids, the predictable density patterns of ancient limestone under centuries of pressure. That is what the textbooks say is down there. What they found was something else entirely. The GPR returns showed spiral formations and vertical shafts, descending not 10 meters, not 50, but hundreds of meters into the bedrock. The formations displayed a geometric regularity that geologists will tell you does not emerge from natural processes. Rock fractures randomly. Water carves irregular channels. Tectonic pressure creates fault lines, not spirals. Spirals require intention. To give you a sense of the depth involved, the deepest confirmed pharaonic tomb in Egypt, the tomb of Seti, in the Valley of the Kings, descends approximately 100 meters below the surface. The formations Malanga and Biondi identified begin at depths that make Seti's tomb look like a shallow grave. The conventional response from Egyptologists was swift. These were karst formations, natural cavities dissolved by ancient groundwater moving through limestone over millions of years. It is a real phenomenon. Karst systems are documented, common in limestone geology, and capable of producing surprisingly complex underground shapes. But here is the complication. Karst formations do not produce consistent geometric repetition. They do not produce spirals, and they do not produce the kind of vertical columnar structures that appeared in the GPR returns, descending with near architectural regularity beneath the plateau. The data was not ambiguous. It was inconvenient. The Italian team published their preliminary findings and waited for the scientific community to respond with the one thing that would resolve the question cleanly: independent verification. A second team, a second radar, open access to the site. That access was not granted, but the data had already answered one question and opened a far larger one. If these structures are not geological accidents, if they reflect deliberate construction, then something built them at a depth the official history of Egypt cannot account for. Who built them? When those answers would not come from the March data, they would come 3 months later, at a depth that changed the scale of the question entirely. Before we go deeper underground, we need to spend a moment on the surface, because the reaction to the Malanga Bionde data is itself a form of evidence. Dr. Zahi Hawass has been the most prominent voice in Egyptology for the last 3 decades. Former Minister of Antiquities for Egypt, excavator of major sites, a figure whose approval or rejection carries enormous institutional weight inside the field. When the March 2025 GPR findings circulated, Hawass's response was swift and categorical. The data showed natural formations. The interpretations were irresponsible, and no structures of the kind described existed beneath the plateau. That response followed a recognizable pattern. Consider what happened in the 1990s, when geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University published his analysis of the weathering on the Great Sphinx. Schoch argued, and still argues, that the erosion on the Sphinx's body was caused by prolonged rainfall, not wind and sand. The distinction matters enormously. The last time heavy rainfall fell on the Giza region for a sustained period was approximately 10,000 years ago. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx predates accepted Egyptian civilization by at least 6,000 years. Hawass dismissed Schoch's findings in terms that did not engage the geological evidence. The rejection was not scientific. It was positional. The same pattern applies to the 2025 data. The official Egyptological response did not produce a competing dataset. It did not fund a second survey. It did not publish a geological analysis explaining specifically how the spiral formations could be produced by natural karst processes. It produced a statement. Now, to be fair, and fairness matters here, there are legitimate reasons to scrutinize GPR interpretations from teams outside the traditional academic structure. Ground-penetrating radar data requires expert calibration. Depth estimates can be affected by subsurface moisture content. Geometric interpretations are only as reliable as the baseline geological model against which they are compared. These are real methodological concerns. They deserve to be taken seriously. But here is what separates genuine scientific skepticism from institutional resistance. Genuine skepticism produces investigation. Institutional resistance produces denial. The Giza Plateau is one of the most scrutinized archaeological sites on Earth. If natural formations of this complexity and regularity existed elsewhere, in comparable limestone geology, in Europe, in North America, in the Levant, they would be documented. GPR surveys of karst terrain in similar environments do not produce the geometric signature that the March 2025 data showed. The natural formation explanation requires you to accept that under the most famous site in archaeology, a unique and unprecedented geological structure exists. One that happens to look, by every measure of pattern recognition, available to the technology, like deliberate construction. You are free to accept that. But you should understand what you are accepting. And what makes this moment different from decades of fringe claims about the Hall of Records and hidden chambers beneath. Giza is something specific. The June 2025 data did not come from one team, one methodology, or one contested interpretation. It came from multiple independent sources. And what it showed beneath the Pyramid of Kaffa was not a formation. It was a city. By June of 2025, a second, more comprehensive GPR survey had been completed, mapping a wider section of the plateau, including the area directly beneath the Pyramid of Kaffa and reaching deeper into the bedrock than the March scans had penetrated. The depth of the primary structural signatures, approximately 2,100 feet below the surface. Stop for a moment and absorb that number. 2,100 feet. That is the equivalent of descending past a buried 210-story building. The Empire State Building, from street level to roof, stands 1,454 feet. What the June scans identified sits roughly 650 feet beneath even that reference point. No archaeological excavation in human history has reached that depth. The deepest confirmed ancient mines in Egypt, the gold mines of the Eastern Desert, reached perhaps 100 feet into the rock. The deepest pharaonic tomb in the Valley of the Kings, 100 meters. The structures the June survey found are not deeper by a factor of 2 or 3. They are deeper by a factor of 20. What the GPR returns showed at 2,100 feet was not a chamber. It was a complex, a series of interconnected spaces with dimensions so large that the most accessible comparison is an Olympic swimming pool, not one. Multiple chambers of that scale, connected by passageways, at a depth where the geological pressure alone would collapse any hollow space not specifically engineered to withstand it. And the chamber geometry was not irregular. It was not the branching, organic shape that water carves through rock over millennia. The walls returned signatures, consistent with worked stone, flat faces, right angles, and in at least one section of the map, a configuration that 3 independent analysts, reviewing the data separately, described with the same word: intentional. The conventional Egyptological framework has no category for this. The Old Kingdom, the civilization that built the Giza pyramids in the accepted timeline, did not possess the technology to excavate 2,100 feet into bedrock. That is not a contested interpretation. It is a factual description of what Bronze Age copper tools and human labor could not accomplish. You would expect the response from official archaeology to be urgent curiosity. What it was, instead, was the same categorical dismissal that followed the March data and an active resistance to granting independent researchers the access needed to conduct ground truth verification. That resistance, at this scale of potential discovery, is itself the most significant data point in the entire story. But the most unsettling part is still ahead, because the Japanese found something the Italians didn't even look for. And they found it with a completely different method, in a completely different part of the plateau. When 2 independent teams, using independent methodologies, find complementary anomalies at the same site, that is no longer an interpretation problem. That is a convergence problem. And convergence, in science, means one thing. What you are looking for is actually there. The Japanese research team working in the Western Cemetery, a section of the Giza Plateau, distinct from the main pyramid complex. Used historically for the burial of Old Kingdom officials, identified 2 anomalies the Italian scans had not captured. The first, an L-shaped structure embedded in the subsurface, with dimensions inconsistent with any known burial shaft or storage chamber in the Egyptological record. The geometry of an L2 straight arms, meeting at a right angle, is precisely the kind of shape that natural geological processes cannot produce. Rock does not fracture in perfect right angles, that requires planning. The second, a square cavity, sealed, at a depth that places it outside the range of known Old Kingdom construction. Square corners, sealed edges. No debris field, the kind of scatter that always surrounds a natural void where rock has collapsed over time. 2 independent teams, 2 separate methodologies. Anomalies in 3 sections of the same plateau, all pointing toward the same conclusion. Now consider an absence. Inside the pyramids themselves, in the chambers, shafts, and passages that Egyptologists have studied for 2 centuries, there are no construction records, no inscriptions describing the building process, no administrative papyri detailing labor organization for the pyramids themselves. The way such documents exist for every other major Egyptian construction project. The Wadi al-Jarraf papyri, discovered in 2013. describe logistics for the Great Pyramid, but they record material deliveries, not a construction method that accounts for the engineering precision involved. For a civilization that recorded grain deliveries, cattle counts, and the daily schedules of temple priests, the silence around the actual construction of the Giza complex is not a minor gap. It is a structural absence. And here is where the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss. Göbekli Tepe, in southeastern Turkey, was classified as a natural formation for decades. Karahan Tepe, 40 kilometers away, was not excavated until 2019. Both sites are now accepted as evidence of organized, symbolically sophisticated human activity, dating to at least 10,000 BCE, rewriting by roughly 6,000 years the accepted timeline of complex civilization. The dismissal came first. The evidence came later. The revision of the official timeline came last, and reluctantly. That sequence should be familiar. It is exactly the sequence playing out in real time beneath the Giza Plateau. The geological case for a pre-dynastic presence at Giza does not rest on the 2025 GPR data alone. It has a foundation that predates those surveys by 30 years. In 1991, Robert Schoch published his analysis of the weathering on the Great Sphinx. The erosion he documented on the Sphinx's body is vertical and deep, produced by sustained rainfall flowing over the stone surface over an extended period. Wind erosion produces horizontal striations. What Schoch found was precipitation erosion, and the geological record of rainfall in the Giza region is not ambiguous. The last sustained wet period was approximately 7,000 to 10,000 BCE, during what geologists call the African humid period, when the Sahara was green and North Africa carried weather patterns fundamentally different from today. If the Sphinx was carved during or before that period, the accepted Egyptian timeline is wrong by at least 4,000 to 6,000 years. That places the Sphinx and the plateau complex it was built to anchor squarely within the Younger Dryas boundary. The period between roughly 12,900 and 11,700 years ago, when a rapid global climate event disrupted human populations across the northern hemisphere. The same period, not coincidentally, when Göbekli Tepe was under active construction in Turkey. The 2025 GPR findings are not a standalone anomaly. They are a third data point converging on a hypothesis the geology has been building toward for 3 decades. The Giza Plateau was not the birthplace of Egyptian civilization. It was an inheritance. A civilization sophisticated enough to construct chambers with geometrically precise walls at 2,100 feet below the surface would also explain the structural silence inside the pyramids. You do not record construction instructions for a site that already exists. You record how you used it. The dynastic Egyptians may not have built the deep structures beneath the plateau. They may have found them. And if they found them, if the pharaonic civilization inherited a site of incalculable symbolic importance from a people whose name no text preserves, then everything we think we understand about why the Giza pyramids were built, and for whom, demands a completely different question. Step back from the data for a moment. What the 2025 GPR surveys revealed, taken together with the Japanese L-structure, the Sphinx weathering record, and the documented silence of official Egyptology, is not a mystery in the sensational sense. It is a coherence problem. Evidence from multiple independent sources coheres around a single conclusion that the accepted timeline cannot accommodate. That is not a failure of the evidence. That is a test of the institution. Every major revision in the history of science has followed this structure. Data accumulates at the edges of the accepted model until the center can no longer hold. Continental drift was considered fringe science until the 1960s. The finite existence of Troy was called mythology until Schliemann dug it up. The antiquity of Göbekli Tepe was disputed until the stones forced a reckoning. The stones beneath the Giza Plateau are not finished speaking yet. Imagine descending those 2,100 feet past the bedrock, past the water table, into chambers that have been sealed since before the pharaohs were born. before the concept of a pharaoh existed. Chambers that someone built for some purpose, in a world we have no name for. The pressure of that much stone above you, the silence of that depth. Whatever is down there has waited this long. It will survive the denial. The question is whether we will still be asking the right questions when the access finally comes.